I'd like to welcome you to the Performance Horse Nutrition webinar series. This is the second in that series, and this one will be titled Fundamentals of Forage. And I'd like to go ahead and thank those people that are our sponsors for sticking with us and helping us put this together. As a way of introduction, I'm Dr. Steve Duren, and I'll be your presenter tonight. Also on the line is Dr. Tanya Cubitt, my business partner at Performance Horse. She will be answering questions as we go. So if you have a question while I'm talking, I won't actually answer that. Dr. Cubitt will type you an answer of your question. Also on the line is Rebecca Scow. Rebecca is our office manager, does all of our art, billing, design, those sorts of things, all the social media platforms. So welcome everybody, and I hope you enjoy the seminar tonight. Again, you can ask questions. If you see the little chat button there, it's highlighted there in red so you can see it. If you click on that, then you can actually ask questions in real time. Again, Dr. Cubitt will answer those questions and get you those questions immediately. We'll also have time at the end where you can answer your questions in a group setting, but if you have something burning on your mind right away, type that in. Dr. Cubitt will do her best to get those answered right away. So tonight we're going to talk about forage, and what I wanted to do is first start with the very basics, and that is first a definition of what forage is. Then we're going to talk about some of the common physical forms of forage. We're going to touch a little bit of why forage is so important in the equine diet, discuss how much forage a horse requires on a daily basis, talk about very important quality characteristics of good quality horse forage, again, talk about some different physical forms and potential change the stability of forage, and then talk about special needs horses, those horses that require a different or a special type of forage because of either some sort of disease type situation. So to begin with, we're going to talk about the fundamentals of forage, and the first question we need to answer is, what is forage? And forage is very simply high fiber plant material. So forage is nothing more than pasture plants, hay plants, it's plant material. And two of the most common physical forms of forage that a horse would eat would be the natural growing forage, which would be some sort of pasture forage or pasture plants, and then those same plants or pure cultivars of plants that are cut and dried and stored to be fed at a later time. And when those forages are cut and dried and stored for use at a later time, those are typically our baled forages, baled hay, hay cubes, hay pellets, or chop forage. Those are the common stored physical forms of forage that we have for our horses. So why is forage so important? Well, fiber is important for a healthy digestive system. Horses are anatomically designed to digest plant fiber or forage material. The large hindgut of the horse, that's the large sacculated or balloon-like area on the right-hand side of your screen, that's where the fiber component or the forage component of the diet is digested. There's microorganisms or bacteria that live there, and those bacteria ferment the fiber and then form useful end products that the horse can then absorb and utilize. 65% of the horse's digestive capacity is dedicated to the digestion of fiber. So fiber is a very important dietary consideration for a horse. In addition, forage is a great source of calories or energy in the diet. It's a great source of protein, vitamins, and minerals as well. The other important criteria with forage, if we don't provide enough forage, if we don't provide the horse with enough critical fiber, that digestive system does not function correctly, and therefore the horse will have digestive upset or colic type symptoms. So how does your horse go ahead and begin to acquire that very necessary forage or fiber in his diet? One of the main areas they get it is forage from pasture. So grazing, or the continuous slow intake of that fiber, is the normal type of grazing behavior that horses have. We call that a trickle feeding system. And by trickle feeding, we mean that very small amounts of fiber are going into that digestive system on a continuous basis. In other words, it's trickling in and through that horse's digestive system. And that is exactly the way that digestive system is designed, for small, frequent meals of forage rather than large single meals of forage. Thus, the horse's small stomach allows for that small, continuous, or trickle feeding of fiber into that horse's digestive system. Now, when a horse grazes, he gets a lot of exercise in that grazing behavior. A horse that's out on pasture in a 24-hour period will walk between 8 and 9.5 miles in that 24-hour period. So they get a lot of movement or activity in that grazing behavior. And this is due to the selective nature of horse grazing. They don't stand in one place and eat every blade of grass. They walk around, search for the most appetizing or the most palatable forms of grass, and they consume that. A horse that only has limited access, let's say 7 hours of pasture a day, still gets between 2.5 and 3 miles of daily exercise a day. This is important because a lot of us have horses that are in stalls and don't have access to pasture or access to turnout. And you can see the amount of warm-up, if you will, or the amount of exercise that you have to give a horse just to match what he would normally get just from being in a free grazing type system. The other important criteria that pasture provides horses is it provides some socialization. Horses get to be around other horses. They get to learn a hierarchy. They learn a lot of manners, etc., from that normal foraging behavior. When we look at pasture, how much pasture will a horse be able to consume? A horse will comfortably consume between 2 to 2.5% of his body weight per day in dry feed. So that 1,000-pound horse will get between 20 to 25 pounds of dry forage in a 24-hour period. There's been a lot of research on pasture intake of horses, and they've determined that a horse will eat between 1 and 1.4 pounds of dry forage per hour. And of course, this would be quite variable depending on how much pasture was available and if the horse had to walk many steps between bites or mouthfuls of grass. You can see the top picture there. Those horses have abundant pasture and don't have to travel very far between bites of grass, whereas the bottom picture, those horses would have to travel more before they found grass that was acceptable or palatable for them to eat. Research has also shown that horses will spend between 60 and 70% of their time in some sort of grazing behavior. So if we go on the high side, that 24-hour period, 70% of that would be about 17 hours of grazing in a 24-hour period. So if you look at the grazing behavior of the horse, we see that it's pretty consistent month by month, but there seems to be a spike in April and May. That is actually associated with the greening of pastures when the pasture grass has more sugar in it, and those horses graze even more aggressively at those times of the year. The next thing we have to determine is what is the dry matter intake, or how much dry matter can a horse take in a grazing behavior. If they're grazing fresh grass, they can get about 2.6% of their body weight in that dry forage in a 24-hour period. When we look at hay, they can only take in about 2% of their body weight. Okay, hay is taller, hay is dry. The horse has to spend time going and getting more frequent drinks of water and to go ahead and swallow that hay. We don't feed straw, but you can see that straw, they can take even less because that fiber is very filling in that particular situation. So this then brings us to the question, how much forage does a horse need on a daily basis? So the absolute minimum that a horse would require is 1% of their body weight. The only horses that would actually eat that small amount of forage would be like a racehorse. So that would be a racehorse eating 10 to 12 pounds of dry forage, but then getting 14, 15 pounds of grain because they're in a high racing situation, a high anaerobic situation, and they need lots of calories. When we have a horse that we're trying to get to have a weight loss situation, typically we will dip down and we'll feed those horses about 1.2% of their body weight. So that 1,000-pound horse would be eating about 12 pounds of dry forage a day. For a normal horse, a horse you're not wanting to lose weight, you're wanting to maintain weight, those horses will have a normal starting forage intake of about 1.5% of their body weight. That's 15 pounds of dry forage for a 1,000-pound horse, where the normal intake of horses be anywhere from that 1.8 to 2.2. What is the maximum amount of forage that a horse can eat? Maximum, horses can eat about 3.5 times their body weight, or excuse me, 3.5% of their body weight in dry forage a day. Now this has to be very high quality, very soft stemmed hay in order for them to eat that amount. So take home message, we want our horses to eat at least 2% of their body weight in dry forage a day. If it's a weight loss situation, we'll dip down never less than 1.2% of their body weight in dry forage a day. What determines the nutrient content or the quality of forage? It's determined by a number of factors: stage of maturity, what cutting of hay it is, the growing conditions, what nutrients are in soil, was it properly watered, did it have adequate water or too much water, drying conditions, did it have to lay in the field for many days before it got dry enough to put into a bale. These are all things that dictate quality or nutrient content of the forage. The other thing that determines nutrient content is the type of hay. Is it an alfalfa or legume type hay? Is it a grass type hay? The largest single factor that determines nutrient quality or quality of forage is the stage of growth or maturity, or quite simply plant height. And when you go on the upper left-hand portion of this screen from normal pasture type grass or grass that's of pasture height to move to the right to hay that is about ready to cut where it's gotten quite tall, to on the bottom left-hand side, as it increases in height, the taller that plant material gets, the less digestible it gets. And the reason it becomes less digestible is because it has more non-digestible fiber materials which provide rigidity and help that plant stand up without tipping over. So you can all appreciate that trees are very rigid, lots of non-digestible fiber, and therefore they're not very digestible for horses. So the taller a plant gets, the lower the nutrient digestibility by the horse. It's very important to evaluate and to feed good quality forage to horses. It's actually critical to their health. It's critical to their respiratory health. It's critical to their digestive health. We certainly don't want it to cause a colic or a digestive upset situation. And we also don't want it to cause a disease or have bacteria or microorganisms that can cause disease such as botulism. And the reason all this is so very important in horses is we need to remember that horses do not have the ability to vomit. So when we put poor quality hay into a horse, or we force a horse to eat poor quality hay, it's got to go all the way through the digestive system. They do not have the ability to vomit or to get rid of that. So when we talk about forage evaluation, one of the first things we do is we do a visual evaluation. We simply look at the hay. What kind of things can we look at? We can look at the leaf to stem ratio. When we talk about alfalfa, that's how many leaves it has per stem. Or when we talk about grass, how many blades does it have per stem of grass? We look at the dust or mold concentration. We don't want to feed dusty or moldy hay to horses. We don't want foreign material in hay. Foreign material I simply define as anything that can't outrun the baler. Okay, this could be weeds, this could be rodents, this could be many different things, paper, plastic. We don't want those things to be found in our forage. Another thing we look, especially with grass hay, when grass hay begins to get seed heads, the longer that seed head is, the taller the plant was, and again, the lower the digestibility. We look at hay. Hay is supposed to be a green color. When it goes from green to brown to black, it loses vitamin content and decreases precipitously in quality. The best way to actually determine the quality of hay is to do a quick visual analysis, but the best way is to send a sample of that hay to the laboratory for chemical analysis. Now, the results of that chemical analysis are only as accurate as the sample that you provide. So we must have a representative sample of the hay. So you can't simply bring a flake of hay, or you can't bring a handful of hay and hope that that is representative of your entire hay supply for your horse. So typically what we use to sample hay is a hay probe. We drill that into multiple bales, taking small samples. We mix those samples and then take a representative sample from that and send to the laboratory for analysis. Once that hay is at the analysis, is at the laboratory, they'll do a chemical analysis of the hay. So we would send hay samples to Equa Analytical, for example, or Green Mountain Forage Laboratory. What we typically see, or what we see with high quality horse hay, is oftentimes we'll find that we have adequate protein and energy, but most hays are deficient in copper, zinc, and selenium. Those are trace minerals. And now we've even seen a recent trend for these hays to be marginal in calcium and phosphorus. This all relates back to fertilization and not replacing nutrients that those plants have taken out over years of hay production. When we send that forage in, we'll typically get back a laboratory report or a forage report that will give the nutrient content of that forage. That is very valuable information. Now, a forage analysis will cost anywhere from 18 to 80 bucks. However, there's many feed manufacturers that will actually analyze those for free because they use that data to help better formulate their horse feeds. So what do you need to know when you're looking at a forage analysis report? One of the things that you want to look at is you want to look at the moisture content. It's critical that we don't have moisture above 15%. The reason being, if it's above 15%, you'll get mold growth. That hay could catch on fire. So we don't want a high moisture hay. So if it has over 15% moisture, that is bad for storage of hay, and it will probably mold. Other criteria we look at is digestible energy. That's simply nothing more than the calorie content of the hay. In horses, we use digestible energy, which is the amount of energy they take in minus what comes out in the manure. Another value that we look at is crude protein. Crude protein is given as a percent in the sample. Protein, as you know, is very important for muscle growth, muscle repair, as well as bone growth and bone repair as well. Grass hays, typically 8 to 14% protein. As you get to alfalfa hays, much higher in protein. Many hays are also good sources of fat. Most of the fat content will be about 3% in the diet, but remember, most of that fat in hay is omega-3 fatty acids versus omega-6 fatty acids in many of the oils. If you look at high quality, average quality, and low quality hay, you can look at the different things like protein, total digestible nutrients, and digestible energy or calorie content, and see as you go from high quality to average quality to low quality, those decline. And in this slide, I showed you high quality for a legume or an alfalfa. a mixed alfalfa grass hay, and as well as a straight grass hay. Again, low quality hays will have very low amounts of protein, digestible nutrients, and digestible energy. Other variables we look at are mineral content of the hay. We typically look at calcium and phosphorus. We always want our forage to contain more calcium than phosphorus. We also look at trace minerals. Typically, we evaluate copper, zinc, and manganese. Typically, selenium is also available. We have seen a general trend for lower mineral values in hay. Again, this is due to soil conditions and fertilizer. If we have low amounts of trace minerals and minerals in hay, we must correct those with the rest of the diet. Supplements, grain concentrates become useful at that particular point. Other variables we look at are carbohydrates. These are mostly looked at for people that have horses that are carbohydrate sensitive or have diseases that are carbohydrate sensitive, such as insulin resistance, equine metabolic syndrome, laminitis, or tying up. Ethanol-soluble carbohydrate, those are the sugar content. Water-soluble carbohydrate is sugar plus fructan. We used to use a term called non-structural carbohydrate, which mathematically is equivalent to water-soluble carbohydrate plus starch. Very important, you cannot look at a hay and determine sugar content. You also can't assume that because it was first cutting or second cutting, it will have a lower sugar content than another cutting of hay. The next thing we need to talk about with forages is types of forages. There's two general types of forages that we feed horses. We feed them either grass forages or legume forages. Grass varieties include many common ones: Timothy, orchard grass, brome grass, Bermuda, TEFF, to name just a few. There's many, many more. The common legumes that we feed to horses, those would be alfalfa and clover are the most popular types of legume that we feed to horses. So what is the difference? Alfalfa, that is a legume forage, and alfalfa forages typically have high protein, so greater than 16% protein. They have a high calorie content. Alfalfa forages also have a very high calcium content and a moderate to low phosphorus content. They're moderate in fiber. Interestingly, alfalfa is low in sugar characteristics. Most people don't understand that. They think because alfalfa is very rich and lush looking that it would have a high sugar content. That is not the case. So alfalfa is a high protein, high energy, low sugar type forage for horses. If we compare that to Timothy grass, Timothy is a cool season grass or a C3 grass. They have a moderate protein, so typically from 8 to 12% protein, a moderate calorie content, less than we see with alfalfa, but they also have a low calcium and phosphorus, so they're not rich in those two minerals. They have a fiber content, and because it's a cool season grass, it is high in sugar content. Orchard grass hay, another cool season C3 grass, has a very similar angel to what Timothy would have. They're moderate or certainly would contain less protein than an alfalfa type forage. Moderate energy, so Timothy orchard grass would contain less calories as well. Like Timothy, it's low in calcium and phosphorus and high in fiber, also high in sugar. So you can see how most of these cool season grasses are more like each other than they're actually different from each other. Now here's a new grass that is commonly fed to horses now. It's a warm season, or what they call a C4 grass. Warm season grasses grow better in warmer climates. The TEFF grass forage is similar to other grasses, and it's moderate in protein, moderate in calories, still has that low calcium and phosphorus content, high in fiber, But here's something. Here is a grass forage that's actually low in sugar. So that's very interesting. This C4 grass stores carbohydrate differently and does not store them as sugars. Now let's talk just a little bit about the physical forms of hay. We have hay that comes in conventional bales. This would be like our 2-string bales. Out here in Idaho, the hay that I feed actually is a 6-string bale. A typical conventional 2-string bale would weigh 50 pounds potentially. My 6-string bales weigh over 1,000 pounds. We have those bales that can be compressed mechanically and formed into compressed bales, which are very uniform bales, heavier, more compact. We can also condense that hay into cubes, pellets, chopped hay. But what is the nutrient difference when we take these hays and put it into different physical forms? The only form of hay that is actually different from what it would be in any other form would that be the chopped. And that's not because the mechanical processing does anything to hay. It's because most chopped products have added molasses or oil added to them as a means of suppression of dust, and these add calories to the hay. Otherwise, they would have the same digestibility as the hay. So the mechanical processing of hay, baled hay to compressed hay, baled hay to cubes, baled hay to pellets, baled hay to chop, all this requires grinding. It requires steam and pressure to force it into these different shapes or different physical forms of forage that are available for horses. The take-home message from that is all of the compressing, the grinding, the pelleting, cubing, all of those different things, they do not change the digestibility of forage. In other words, a good quality second cut alfalfa that's baled compared to that same alfalfa that is put into a cube or a pellet, it's exactly the same. So very good quality hay, the very best quality hays are only about 50% digestible, okay? Pelleting, cubing, all that doesn't make it more digestible. It's still very good hay, only is about 50% digestible by the horse. The other types of forage that we don't see much here in the United States are those products that are haylages or silages or baleages. And what these are plant material that was cut, allowed to wilt or partially dry, and then they were packaged in a form that excludes oxygen. So in a plastic wrap to prevent them from molding. This will allow a fermentation to occur and the pH will actually get below 5. They will actually smell acidic, if you will. Now, when you have these hays, and if these particular forage products aren't preserved properly, you have an increased likelihood of things going wrong. The most simple thing to go wrong would be to mold. More complicated and more dangerous things would be to have different toxins such as botulism form in those particular forages. So if you're going to feed some ensiled forage to your horse, you need to be very, very conscious that it was put up correctly. You also need to know once that plastic is ripped or torn, that hay will begin to decline or decay almost immediately. So care is required in feeding those different types of forages. Now finally, we'll talk a little bit about special needs horses, horses that may require a special type of forage. Most of us can simply choose whether we want to feed a legume, an alfalfa or clover, or we want to feed a grass forage or even a mixed forage to horses. But there are certain horses, special needs horses, that require different things. The two biggest special needs that we see are those horses that are sugar sensitive and those horses that have allergies. For horses that are sugar sensitive, things that include insulin resistance, Cushing's disease, equine metabolic syndrome, we have to analyze the sugar content of the hay. Again, you can't look at it and determine the sugar content of the hay. You have to have that analyzed. We do have some low sugar hay options that are typically low in sugar. Those would include things like alfalfa and the C4 grass TEFF. The other special need that we run across a lot are horses that have developed food allergies. They're allergic to Timothy. They're allergic to orchard. They're allergic to a particular type hay. Typically, you'll use allergen test for your horse. It will identify those particular things that your horse may be sensitive to, and then it's a matter of simply selecting hays that don't have those types of plants that that horse would be sensitive to. All right, that concludes what I wanted to talk about with forage. You can simply type in your questions that you haven't already typed in, and Tanya's feverishly typing to answer. We're going to do this again next Wednesday. That would be April 8th, again, 8 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Dr. Cubitt this time is going to talk about building a diet. In the first seminar, we talked about the digestive system and the importance of understanding what it is and how it functions. Tonight, we talked about forage, and we talked about how important forage is, but we also spoke that forage may be deficient in certain things, may not have enough calories, may not have enough mineral content or protein content. And Dr. Cubitt next week is going to say and put all this together and talk about how do you balance a diet? How do you put something